Hello, I'm Michael, and if you're here, it's because you're as attracted to fear as I am. This is probably the most unusual occurrence of my life so far, but I don't think I'll ever come across anything more peculiar. One Thursday, I was working my usual night shifts at KFC. He was tired and had no clients in the last hour. I bought a cigarette. It was 2 in the morning. The empty road loomed before my eyes like a long-lost footprint. I should have taken a few puffs when I heard the ringing of the entrance bell. Noticing that a customer had arrived, I quickly entered through the back door and headed straight to the counter. When I entered the restaurant, I was amazed to see that the last customer, a woman in her 30s, was standing by the counter holding a swaddled baby in her arms. Her appearance was so peculiar that I put the baby aside and continued to observe her. She had no similarity to new mothers. His clothing was so wet that one could barely tell its true color. She looked like a woman who had lived on the streets for a long period. As I looked at her, he understood what I was thinking and asked me, "Are you going to accept my request?" Realizing how unpleasant I had been, I quickly rectified my attitude and politely said, "Welcome to KFC, ma'am. What would you like to order? Please accept my apology." "Okay, I'll have a big bucket of fried chicken and fries and a Pepsi to wash it down." He stated, "Okay, ma'am, please nod." She walked slowly to the next table and settled down with her baby, holding him. Realizing that the baby was asleep, I tried to maintain as much silence as possible. I asked our night chef to start the order. When she returned, I watched the woman looking at her baby with a loving smile. The smile reminded me of my mother when she used to caress my cheek before going to bed. In this world, no one can love you more than your mother, and looking at this woman, I couldn't help but feel a little emotional. She was caressing the infant and singing a lullaby while gently moving him in her arms. I felt deeply affected by the poor woman. Perhaps she was going through a difficult period in her life, but like all other mothers, she also aspired to provide the best for her son. I continued looking at her with the tip of my eye. It was fascinating to watch her taking care of her little one. After 10 minutes, their food arrived. I put it in a wrapper and began to move towards his table. As I approached, she nuzzled her baby even closer to her breast. I wanted to watch the baby, but I realized that she was protective, and my behavior might have confused her a little, so her response was understandable. "Here is your food, lady. Please enjoy it, and let me know if you require anything additional." Maintaining my interest, he returned to the counter, and I provided him with space to feast on his food. Her bone structure indicated that she had been without food for a period, so he did not wish to disturb her again. When he saw the huge bucket of chicken, his eyes shone with happiness, and he began to eat his food. He grabbed a chicken leg and pulled out a large piece of meat. I could hear her chewing hard. After finishing 3 chicken thighs in the blink of an eye, she turned to her baby and said, "Look who's finally awake. Did I make you stand up? Well, you can't just quietly eat KFC chicken. No, it is not possible to consume them. You are not the right age. I assure you that when you develop, I will bring you here, and you will have the opportunity to consume as much fried chicken as you prefer." I loved the way she communicated with her baby, but I don't understand why one thing continued to challenge my mind. As she arrived to give him her order, an intense aroma of bleach seeped out of her. His clothes didn't look like they had been washed long ago, so he wondered why he suddenly smelled bleach. Reflecting on this, the woman spoke to her baby in the same way as before. "Yes, Dad will see us soon. Until then, we should be a good girl and pay attention to Mommy's words, okay?" So I understood that it was a girl. Finally, I decided that when I got to pay her, I would ask her to allow me to take the little one and play with him. Additionally, I chose to give her some cash to assist her and her little one. As a woman, I am very aware of the problems of a mother, so I wanted to assist this woman in my own way. I was irritated and angry that the father of this child would abandon his wife and daughter in such a circumstance. Everything was going well until something terrifying happened. Suddenly, the woman began to make the child quiet, saying, "No, don't cry. Mom is here. Don't cry, Emma. Know that if you cry, I will too. Come on, my angel, don't lose your cool." She got up from her seat and began moving her baby back and forth, just as parents do to prevent their child from crying. Although in this scenario, her baby was not crying at all. This shocked me deeply when I realized that I had not heard a single sound from the baby since she appeared. Has this woman gone crazy? If not, what the hell is wrong with him? As the thought made me reflect, I responded hoarsely, Ma'am, your baby isn't crying. How do you understand that he is not crying? Can't you hear her crying?" He stated, "There is no other sound except our voices." "How could you know?" You are very young, and definitely not like a mother. Leave my little one and me alone." "No, ma'am, I'm simply trying to attend." "If you silence yourself, don't you realize that your voice is causing her to cry even more intensely?" However, her baby did not cry. She totally dismissed me and continued to shush her little boy as always. Feeling totally disoriented and confused in this whole circumstance, I decided to call Albert, our night chef. Hearing my voice, he hurriedly left the kitchen, and I told him the whole situation, pointing at this woman. The woman wasn't looking at us. She was simply humming a lullaby and moving her baby from side to side, as if Alvin and I weren't there. Asphyxiated by suspense, we advanced towards her and looked at her arms. What I saw caused my skin to crawl. In reality, there was a baby, but it was not alive. On the other hand, it was the lifeless body of a dead infant with a deformed face that had begun to rot. Undoubtedly, this little guy had passed away long ago, and the lie I smelled was his. According to the rules of human nature, the dead body had begun to disintegrate, causing worms and other bacteria to occupy it. Perhaps to scare them away, this woman spread bleach on her baby's lifeless body. When the police arrived and took her to the hospital, she was completely devastated. When the paramedics told her that her baby was no longer there, she cried desperately. This woman was later found to be homeless. An individual found her by chance on the street, offering her money in exchange for sexual relations. The man probably paid her and left, but unfortunately she became pregnant. In her complicated circumstances, although a healthy girl was born, she was a drug user and led a degrading life. She did not provide the necessary care, and the trauma of losing her baby impacted her so strongly that she began to pretend to be alive, carrying the lifeless body in her arms wherever she went. Getting some money somehow, and arriving at KFC to eat with a dead child in your arms may be the last thing anyone with power can expect. It breaks my heart that no one has shown interest in helping her, or at least showing interest. I am telling this story with the goal of addressing the individual who slept with her without using security, and who never bothered to dominate her. Therefore, if you are watching this, I want to express to you out loud that just because you are homeless and ruining your life, your abhorrent behavior can never be justified. You should have at least been a male and checked her out. I wish you to burn in infertility. I would like to invite you to my newly launched channel, where you will discover stories based on real events told in the first person. I await you in Callejón del Lobo, where I will welcome you with great pleasure. The KFC near my house had the most terrifying statue of Colonel Sanders I have ever seen. It stood in the corner of the dining room, at least 8 feet tall, looming over customers as they tucked into chicken and mashed potatoes. No one sat at the table closest to the statue. There was a negative vibe as you approached her. Cold places, unusual aromas, the impression that you were being watched. The scary statue didn't stop me from visiting KFC at least twice a week, but it did darken the experience. The realistic nature of the sculpture was disturbing. The ideal white hair and goatee, the wrinkles under his eyes, the pale ivory outfit, and just a glance at the pink tongue inside his square teeth. You almost anticipated the gigantic object clearing your throat at any moment. He started working part-time at that KFC in order to save some extra money for gifts. It was at that moment that I decided to leave fast food, since the conditions were not that unfavorable until I was moved to the night shift. About a month after his visit to the restaurant, if the statue of Colonel Sanders was terrifying during the day, it was downright terrifying at night. Every time I looked at her, she always seemed a little different, with her eyes a little colder. I started capturing images of the statue every night to check if it was crazy or if it was really transforming. However, regardless of the angle or light, the image was always blurry on my phone. I didn't like it very much, and it was working in winter, but I managed to get over it since the salary continued to increase. Even after the holidays, I chose to stay because I now had the money I needed to save for the first time in my life. Then, one night in January, I made a horrible mistake. I promised to close the KFC on my own after the night shift. Mandy was supposed to assist me. She's a beautiful redhead who started around the same time as me, but she was feeling unwell, so I intended to take the reins of closure herself. He was trying to score points with her before finding the courage to ask her out on a date. After that terrible night, I never saw Mandy again. After the last customers left, I began my termination process. I closed the doors, turned off the main lights, and then grabbed a Bluetooth speaker, put it on the dining room table, and started cleaning while listening to some classic rock. I disinfected all areas except for the table near the Sanders statue. Again, no one sat there, so it was always in perfect condition. We had established an official policy of only closing with 2 or more workers in the establishment. The official reason was safety and responsibility, but as the minutes passed, I felt like someone was moving through the restaurant without me noticing. When I was about to start cleaning the bathrooms, I heard a crash in the kitchen. "Amanda, I used my mop up high to protect myself." There was a loud noise followed by silence. I left the counter, still holding the mop like a club. Something had overtaken the heating station in the back area of the kitchen. There were several metal shelves and heat lights to keep food warm. It was too heavy to be thrown by a draft or rats. Sure, we owned rats. I leaned the mop against the wall and put the warming station back in place. Returning to the dining room, I screamed. While I wasn't looking, the statue of Colonel Sanders had drifted off course. He hadn't made much movement, just a slight movement of his head, but it was clearly different from what it had been in previous moments. His eyes expanded, becoming almost black in the lack of light, and his smile was more energetic than in the past, more extensive. "Am I believing this?" I said out loud, holding the mop so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The statue made no reaction. I wished to express, obviously not. After all, it was simply a cursed statue, nothing more than plaster and paint. However, I chose to get on top of cleaning the bathroom and risk a reprimand from my supervisor on my next shift. "Ah, are you here alone?" For a long time, a hoarse voice questioned me in the kitchen. I froze. "Amanda?" I asked again, still not looking at myself again. "No, I understand. I'm not Mandy." The voice was male with a slight accent that I couldn't recognize. It was difficult for me to swallow. I went back to find the source. Something was wrong with the lighting in the back area of the kitchen. Everything was reflected in an intense and unnatural darkness. I observed a figure in the gloom, a shadow darker than the surrounding shadows, with the appearance of a man. "Where do you come from?" Question mark. I couldn't perceive his face, but I felt that that shadow was smiling. I was different things, a military man, a chef, a businessman, a human being. Now I am next to you. Did you say that I was alone, or had I imagined it? The voice questioned. I had a dry mouth, and it was difficult for me to communicate. There was an intense noise behind me in the dining room, and then another. I quickly looked back. I didn't want to take my eyes off the shadow in the kitchen for a long period. The statue of Colonel Sanders had experienced a new mobility. Now she was sitting in the dining room, partially hunched over, as if trying to escape or preparing to jump. "Do you know why I started calling these establishments KFC?" The shadow questioned me. I came back and realized that she was also closer to me. Now, the light in the entire kitchen was dim and getting progressively darker. I was trapped between 2 food-hungry creatures waiting for me to run away so they could chase me. All I could do was accumulate time. "KFC? Well, it's Kentucky Fried Chicken," I responded. "No," the shadowy individual muttered. "That's why they called me, but initially KFC symbolized the type of public I wanted to attract to my establishments. The murderer's favorite chicken." Again a noise was heard behind me. He was aware that the statue was moving in the dining room. There was the sound of heavy boards being dragged off the path. I wanted to turn and watch, but I didn't want to tilt my head toward the shadow in the kitchen. At any moment, I longed to feel a huge plaster hand reach for the back of my neck and press it. A bell made a faint sound. Suddenly, the light returned to its usual state in the kitchen. A familiar voice exclaimed, "Why are you standing behind the counter with a mop?" Mandy. She had entered through the front door and unlocked it with her personal key. Every time a customer entered, the bell was activated. I moved the mop and leaned on the counter. There were no signs of that shadow object in the kitchen. Looking into the dining room, I noticed that the statue of Colonel Sanders was back in its usual corner, precisely as it was at the beginning of my shift. "Oh, Nick, you look awful," Mandy said as she walked toward me. "What are you doing in this place?" I felt guilty for asking you to close on your own. I thought I could help you finish. "Nick, are you okay? You look like you're planning to throw up." Without saying a word, I walked up to the counter, grabbed Mandy's hand, and pulled her out of the unlocked KFC. Just as the front door closed, I heard another creak, as if a large plaster figure was moving to watch us leave. It was the last time I went to a KFC or any other dining establishment. The next morning I left work and contacted my boss to confirm that it was my responsibility that the place was not closed properly. I didn't want Mandy to get into conflict, although I suggested she look for a new job. She swore she would consider it. I have never had the courage to ask her out. I concluded my rental agreement ahead of schedule and moved out of town for a month. Now I have a new space, smaller but comfortable enough. I don't leave my house much. Currently, I can work from home and get all my food. The few times I decide to go for a walk, I do it quickly,